listening to the Discovery Pod, a podcast dedicated to conversations with leaders in the social profit sector. Discover the origin stories of CEOs, founders, and other senior leaders and learn from them so you can accomplish what is most important. Now, on with the show with your host, Douglas Nelson.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Discovery Pod, Conversations with Social Profit Leaders. Today on the show, our guest is Laura Syron. She's the CEO of Diabetes Canada, and we're really pleased to have her here today. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you, Doug. Pleased to be here.
Laura, this podcast, over the course of a number of interviews, we've talked to a lot of people about their journeys to the CEO chair. Your journey to CEO of Diabetes Canada is one that is particularly interesting to me, and I think really a great education for our listeners for how to build a leadership career in the social profit sector. So maybe you could start with your role at Heart and Stroke and bring us forward to today and how you put all of the elements of social profit leadership together in one package.
Sure, happy to. Yeah, and it's been something that I've been quite deliberate and worked hard about, so I appreciate the question. So I started at Heart and Stroke back in the mid-90s, and I was on the mission side of the house. So I started as manager of stroke, but ultimately worked up to be VP of all scientific research, advocacy, and education. And while I loved the mission side, I was there for 15 years. My goal was to be the CEO of a not-for-profit. And I had some great advice from board members at the time, but I could also see sitting on the management team that I really needed to get direct fundraising experience, that if I could be a CEO that had deep mission, but also deep fundraising, that I would be really effective. And so after about 15 years, I thought, well, I needed to branch out. I also I had obviously been in a community-based national organization, Heart and Stroke, and I wanted to try to start honing my fundraising skills at a hospital foundation because it's just a very different model. And I was lucky enough to be able to land a job at Princess Margaret Cancer Foundation, one of the main cancer hospitals in Canada, based in Toronto. And there I was VP of what they call community programs. So that was all our annual giving, our mid-level giving, our third-party events, our digital fundraising, and our ethnocultural fundraising. And that was an incredible learning journey for me. So I was able to bring my mission skills, but also really pick up the fundraising skills. I'd been around fundraising for 15 years at the senior leadership table at Heart and Stroke, but now I had bottom line accountability for delivering the revenue. And also, just as I said, in a hospital foundation, just such a different environment. And so I got to see firsthand excellent major gift fundraising, mid-level in a really formal, good way, ethnocultural I was able to bring there, et cetera. So really was able to cut my teeth. What I missed, though, was fundraising in, again, a national health charity, because at a hospital foundation, you raise the money, but then you hand it over to the hospital for it to be spent. And I missed and wanted to be at a table, again, with the goal of being a CEO, where I was on the side of raising the money, but then I was partnering with my mission and marketing partners to talk about, well, how are we going to spend it? And that iteration between, well, here's what we want to do in mission, so how might we think about framing that and inspiring donors with that? But then here's what donors are interested, so how could we think about framing mission? So I had the opportunity to go over to the Arthritis Society, so a national health charity, as executive director. And then not long after that, the chief development officer left and they asked me if I wanted to take that on as well. So for 2 years, I was there doing that. And so by that point, I had about 15 years of mission and almost 10 years of fundraising. And so when the CEO role came open at Diabetes Canada, it was a perfect opportunity for me to be able to bring those two sets of competencies together and really lead an organization thinking, and especially during COVID as I've come on, thinking about creating a fundraising first mentality while also really relying on my mission competencies and my deep understanding of stakeholder relations and the health systems environment, et cetera. So I've been there about 3.5 months now. And what I would say is exactly as I'd hoped, having both sides of the house, so to speak, has been incredibly valuable in terms of how I can lead the team and understand sort of the ecosystem and the landscape.
Well, I think thank you for sharing that. The deliberateness with which you undertook to say, okay, I'm great on this mission side, I'm going to figure out fundraising is, I think, a rarity in our sector. And I think it's a good example of what it takes to be really effective in these leadership roles. I'm curious, you've done fundraising for the national level, and you've done fundraising at the hospital. How are the conversations with donors different between the two types of organizations?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I would say there's a tendency when you're on the national side to think, oh, they're so much easier in a hospital. And the reason you think it's easier, and in some ways this is true. So my experience in the conversation with donors when you're in a hospital foundation is the thing for which they are inspired to give tends to be more immediate and quite tangible for them. So you can walk them over to the hospital. You can show them the piece of equipment. You can introduce them very specifically to the researcher or clinician that they're interested in supporting. You don't have that on the national side. I mean, of course, you can talk about the kinds of researchers that they're going to support, but there's no bricks and mortar, but also in terms of the kind of research, again, because you're doing a peer-reviewed excellent, you don't always know who's going to get funded. So you can't be as specific. On the other hand, when you're talking to donors in the National Health Charity, it necessitates, which I think is really important, that sense of inspiring the donors. What is it that, in my case now, Diabetes Canada is doing in its mission activities? What's its vision, but what's its unique role? And your job as a fundraiser is to really paint the picture in an inspiring way that you have to do a little bit less, honestly, in the hospital, because the hospital itself paints the picture, and also on the hospital side, where you find your donors is different. So the kind of donors that you're going to get on the hospital side, especially, for example, in my case at a cancer hospital, is it's very, very true that you very much get the grateful patient donor. And that may be grateful, not even in my case that the person lived, but the care was so amazing and all that kind of stuff. So again, how you are speaking to the donor, whether it's in DM, whether it's at events, whether it's major gifts, even whether it's corporate, you're often talking to them about how this gift could display gratitude. Whereas when you're in a national health charity, they are grateful for what the organization does, a Heart and Stroke, a Diabetes Canada, but it's a broader kind of more motherhood sense of gratitude. It's not, you saved my life, or you made, my child's last couple days, So it's, again, more the donors want to hear on that side, like, talk to me about the unique difference your organization is making. Don't just talk to me about research. Don't just talk, about education. So if Diabetes Canada didn't exist, what wouldn't be happening to people living with diabetes or people at risk of diabetes? Or what unique role in the ecosystem? So to me, you're talking to donors when you're in a national community-based health charity or any kind of charity, you're talking a lot more, you're painting a picture of an ecosystem, and you're speaking a lot more. And again, it doesn't matter whether it's a DM donor or a corporate donor, and anything, you're talking about, in a sense, your unique value proposition. Whereas when you're at a hospital, they've almost already experienced that unique value proposition because it happened to them or someone that they loved. And so it's a very different, the storytelling is different and the motivations might be different. In a community-based one, it may be more around almost like an insurance. Like if I give to Heart and Stroke or I give to diabetes, I hope one day when myself or a loved one gets diagnosed, there's been more progress on the research, or the government, you've advocated for a better system of coverage or access to medications. Whereas when I give on the hospital foundation side, either it's out of gratitude or at maybe a local community hospital, when I go there, I hope there's an extra MRI machine so that my wait is less. So one is more thinking of the future, and the other one is thinking more immediate and what might happen. And again, neither are good or bad. They're just quite different.
Right. And it's been fascinating for me watching a number of the national health community-based organizations try to diversify their revenue and move into significant philanthropy or major gifts. And it's really challenging for them to adapt their case for support to make it that tangible, this is what you're giving to. And we've seen a lot of organizations struggle. You mentioned one of your goals at Diabetes Canada is to create a fundraising first mentality. Say a little bit more about that, what that means on a day-to-day basis, and how that might lead Diabetes Canada to being able to ask and receive for those significant major gifts.
Yeah. So It's a great question. I would say in terms of my experiences where I'm trying to change a bit of a culture of, well, we're a big disease, which we are, and therefore the money will come in and we will do X with the money. And historically, big organizations, heart and stroke, cancer, diabetes, may have had to do less selling of themselves, so to speak, just because of course you gave to them. They were big diseases and a whole bunch of things, which we could do a whole nother podcast on, have changed over time, right? Donors' expectations, the way millennials and other folks want to be involved in giving back and all that kind of business. And so when I came to Diabetes Canada, it was like, well, say, for example, at the senior leadership table, when we meet weekly, why was there not a lot of discussion around what was happening in fundraising? Not just updating results, but how are we speaking to donors? How are we talking about things? Or for example, I'll give you an example from today. I got given a speech that I'm now, of course, recording virtually to be shown at a virtual gala we're doing in Manitoba later next month. And the language, Doug, in the speech was our meaning Diabetes Canada volunteer committee. And I want to thank our committee and the language was all about Diabetes Canada as hero, not volunteer and donor as hero. And we must switch that. We must switch that. If we're congratulating ourselves on why these people want to support us, that's not going to inspire people. It's got to be, wow, even in COVID, even though, this is the 11th year of this gala and you couldn't do it in person, you guys rallied together. We just supported you to make it happen. And without you, we couldn't be doing this gala. And first of all, Doug, it's true. And second of all, if I'm a donor and I'm sitting in that gala audience and I potentially have the possibility of making a transformational gift, when I hear an organization speak like that, putting the donors and volunteers at the center and as the hero, and then framing the work we have to do. So I had them rewrite the speech to talk about it is because of people like you, it is because of supporters and volunteers that we may ultimately be able to end diabetes, which is our tagline. And it's about the framing, and that may sound small, but that's just one small example of as we write our DM, but as we do our advocacy work, as we speak in our education, we've done a lot of now webinars and stuff. How are we positioning the organization so that we make sure we're doing soft asks in everything we do, but we're doing them in a way that isn't transactional, it's inspirational. And so for me, that's sort of the shifts. It's how much airtime are we thinking about fundraising? And a phrase that I learned a long time ago at Heart and Stroke that I always think of is, no money, no mission, no mission, no money. And it's so true. If you don't have a really compelling mission, it's going to be hard for you to attract donors. But at the same time, you can have the most compelling mission. And if you don't focus on fundraising, if you somehow think, well, fundraising is the dirty side of that coin, you're not going to succeed. It's not the dirty side of the coin. They must work synergistically, wrap together sort of the connective tissue of marketing, but they must work synergistically. And I think what I really took from my time at Princess Margaret is this sense that people are generous and people either want to show gratitude or be inspired. They see family members with diabetes and they do want to end diabetes. So how do you honor that? By creating opportunities for them to display that inspiration or that gratitude or whatever, versus the thinking of, oh, well, we better go ask these people for money. Like, it's completely different. And I think as I took over Diabetes Canada, this idea that fundraising is asking for money versus fundraising is being able to frame our mission in a way that inspires people to support it. And that might sound like words, but to me, it's not.
No, I think it's critically important. It is the answer to, I think, national community-based fundraising. It's also the answer to how to fundraise during the COVID pandemic, which is the organizations that we see that are successful are the ones that are talking about the impact of the pandemic on the people they serve, on the mission they serve, rather than talking about the pandemic's impact on the organizations themselves.
Exactly.
Being able to reflect back why we're all here, We're at Diabetes Canada. You're there to serve Canadians with diabetes and reduce the number of Canadians who are diagnosed on an annual basis with type 2 diabetes. You have a constituency that you are serving, and the donors that are giving to your organization care about that constituency. So that's what you should be talking about. And it's really refreshing to hear you talk that way. I think it's much more than words. It is really everything when it comes to firing up and sustaining a fundraising engine.
Absolutely. And I think that, as you said, COVID has thrown a wrench in things, but it really separated organizations who have sort of said, and I don't mean this, but, woe is me a bit, or like, without you, we're not going to survive. And instead, for example, with diabetes, unfortunately with COVID, people that live with diabetes and who get COVID have much worse outcomes. And we don't know why yet. But I have made sure from my time when we came in that this is about, oh my gosh, the work that you're supporting is even more important because people living with diabetes are suffering from COVID. So help us help them, right? And they're both true. I mean, we're down like everybody else, but it's about how you, again, it comes back to inspiration, right? How you want to encourage people to think about supporting you. And again, the other thing I would say during COVID is that support doesn't always have to be monetary, right? So how can you get involved in our advocacy efforts? We just put out something this week about food insecurity, which has obviously been heightened during COVID. And we've been communicated to by people living with diabetes that sometimes there's now hard choices between being able to afford their medication and afford healthy food. So how can we, again, first of all, help those people? What can we do to advocate to government, et cetera? And so partly what we can say to people is not only, would we love you to support us with a donation, but would you sign this petition? Would you show your support? And sometimes we're having the conversations that, to me, remind me very much of Major Gift Conversations, is sometimes those first moves in moves management aren't about the ask at all. It's about, would you sign this petition? Would you get, for example, just the government in the Yukon just started actually covering all continuous glucose monitors and flash monitors for everyone in the Yukon. It's going to make a huge difference. And part of that was an advocacy effort that we went out to people. And there was no ask, no financial ask, other than, we know we're at a tipping point here. Would you help us carry this across the finish line? And we did. And then, with those people, now they can see, and then of course you go back again, it's, fundraising 101. Thank you for doing that. Without you, this wouldn't have happened. And now with that, et cetera, et cetera. So
you're part of the movement now. And the next step is.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to pivot slightly away from fundraising for a time, which is rare for me to ever say that. And I'm really interested in your experience coming in as the new CEO of Diabetes Canada. And I, not telling tales out of school, that there had been a number of people who'd been in that chair in recent years. So there'd been some turnover. You knew about that turnover, of course, going in. How did that revolving door impact how you came into the role and how you approached coming in as CEO?
It was a very important consideration as I thought about my sort of first 30, 60, 90 days. And I think one of the decisions I had to make, Doug, was, did I sort of address it head on, or did I sort of treat it as history? And I actually thought I would address it head on, and I'm really glad I did. So one of the things I acknowledged up front to not only my senior leadership team, but to the whole organization. And when I came in, the organization was about 160 folks. But hey, I know you've been through lots of change. And at the time, of course, it was COVID too, but it was like, and I was explicit. I do an all staff email on Fridays. And it's like, there's been a lot of leadership changes. There's been a lot of change during COVID. I know there's a weariness here. I think part of my approach to that was transparency. I also my style has often been described as authentic. And I thought, given that's my style, I think it's better to acknowledge what I think, people would be thinking, that, oh, here we go again. Here's the next CEO. And rather than pretend it didn't exist, acknowledge it. So there were times that I would be starting meetings and I'm like, hey, you know what? We're going to talk about this strategy thing, whether it's a fundraising or mission or marketing. And excuse me if I'm asking questions that have been asked a lot already, because I know you guys have had a lot of different changes here. My approach also was very much, so next year is the 100th anniversary of insulin, and Diabetes Canada has big plans for it. And when I came in, they were taking me through the plans. And I have to say, I wasn't totally on board with them. But again, because there'd been so much change, my approach was, okay, there's got to have been a lot of great thinking here. Here are some of the concerns I'm having. Can you help me understand if those concerns have already been brought up and how they were addressed? So I think being respectful, being acknowledging of the change, but also I would say being decisive. So I think partly when people go through a lot of change, they need to feel too that there is this new person is in charge, and that things that have been sort of on hold until the new leader are not going to just keep being on hold. So there was a number of things where it's like, okay, take me through this. That's on hold. Yeah, let's go do this. So let's make some change, or let's proceed. And that seemed to be appreciated, so that there was some traction. So from my point, often you sort of say in a new job, oh, you want some early wins. But I think it was more the organization needed to see that they weren't going to sort of be in this stasis all the time. And that, life went on, business goes on. There's a solid new leader. She's listening, but she can also act. And this is back to your initial question. This is where I really think me having both the mission side and the fundraising side has been super helpful, because there were projects on both those sides that had been in stasis or that had maybe got off the rails a bit. And because of my experience, I had a lot of comments in the first couple of weeks of, wow, you actually know about the research community. Like, okay, so great. Now we can make some decisions here. Or, oh, you know about a mid-level giving program. Oh, okay, so we can move. And versus, okay, we're going to have to wait for the CEO to get up to speed and maybe bring in consultants or do whatever. So I think my depth of experience kind of helped with that too, because they hadn't had a CEO in the last couple who kind of had both sides of the house.
Right. And it can be in an organization that's had a lot of leadership change. You can have some team members, some senior leaders in the organization just keeping their head down and trying to wait out the CEO, like they waited out the one before and the one before that. And that resistance to change is real. We have one client that we've worked with for a couple of years now. They came in and was in a situation similar to yours as the CEO, coming in as the CEO. And the first thing that she did was say, okay, we're doing a new strategic plan. And everybody went, oh, because it was the third time they'd heard it in less than 18 months. And so she really reversed course and said, okay, well, let's define what we're doing first, and then we can set a plan for what we're going to do next. And it really paid a lot of dividends for that. And it sounds like that's very similar to the approach you've taken.
Yeah. And in fact, one of the things the board gave me a mandate to do was to start a 3-year strat plan. So when I came in, I said, guys, sort of, we're doing this. And they had heard that. But it became very apparent to me in a couple months that our fiscal starts January. We were going to try to have too many trains running on too many tracks. We were trying to do a 3-year strategy, an annual business plan. We were trying to get through COVID, and I ended up, sadly, because of COVID, having to do a lot of downsizing. And so I think part of a good leader too is knowing when there's too many trains moving on too many tracks. And so I went to the chair of the board and said, let's just put this on pause, the 3-year strat. Like, of course it's important, but at some point we're going to burn out our people. And also, just given the very unique circumstances of COVID, I think we'll all feel better, the whole organization actually, because now we're much more, I had said we were about 160 and now we're down to about 95. So I think it was very important for us to sort of rally around something concrete. And so I said, let's focus on getting the 2021 business plan locked and loaded, and then we'll restart the train on the strat planning. And there was such a huge sigh of relief from my team that, okay, we don't have to have so many plates spinning at the same time. And that there's an acknowledgement that we're tired of all this plate spinning. And it's not that the team doesn't think it's a good thing to do. It was more about me getting the sense of what's the right timing, especially during these unusual times. And people were trying to, blocking and tackling, Doug, like, okay, my department got downsized by half. So we've got to find new ways of doing things. Well, if you're in payroll and you have half the staff and you're trying to figure out, while you're also being asked to contribute to a business plan, while you're also being a strat plan, it's like, how many things, like, I got to learn how to do my job, right? And who's even still on the team, and who do I reach out to, and all that kind of business. So I think that was it's not just like burnout from the leaders, but it's also the good leader. Someone said to me when I started this, good CEOs have two jobs, setting direction and setting pace. And that's essentially it. And that was really helpful for me, actually, because that's exactly it. And I thought, okay, well, I'm setting direction, but I don't think we're at the right pace. And sometimes I think that means speeding up the pace, but sometimes in this case, for example, it's slowing it down or putting on pause. And that's, you have to have the temperature of your organization to know that, right?
Yeah. I've said to many, many boards over the last couple of months is that one of the defining characteristics of the organizations that will be successful through this pandemic are the ones that have the confidence to limit their choices. And there was an instinct, particularly after the initial shock of the pandemic, as organizations move through April and May and into June, there's okay, well, now we should blue sky and reimagine our future. No. If you're needing to reimagine your future, you should reimagine whether you're still operating in September, but really focus on what it is, the value you deliver to your donors, what value you deliver to your mission first and foremost, and work back from there and make it as skinny as possible so that what you're doing, you're executing very, very well. And that is what's going to be your momentum as we move through this pandemic. But the organizations that are fundraising is never going to be the same. We're going to reimagine. It's a risky road.
Yeah. And you're not saying don't pivot. So for example, we've obviously pivoted a lot of our educational opportunities online. And quite frankly, we may never pivot back. And I know everyone's getting tired of the word pivot, but to your point, what you're talking about is different is, okay, well, how are we as an organization? And to me, the last thing your folks need, and whether your folks are your staff, whether your folks are your volunteers, or whether your folks are those you serve, and in our case, also researchers, clinicians, etc., there's already so much change that sort of saying during a time like this, and now we may fundamentally change again, just doesn't make sense. The other thing I would add to that, Doug, that's been very helpful to me is I think this is a time to pull out your values as an organization and to rename them. And if you weren't already doing this, some organizations do this beautifully. Some, they're just on their website or they're up on a wall somewhere. But I actually think going back, because as you said, we had to go from planning in 3 years to 3 weeks, right? Like it had to be like, okay, well, who knows what our stores even open? Like for us, our National Diabetes Trust uses Value Village and like they're not open or whatever. One thing that should be consistent is your values, right? And so one of the first things I did when I came in was, I'm like, guys, what are our values? And it was interesting. There was actually mixed understanding of who could really name them. And so it came back to, okay, let's put them on a piece of paper and let's talk in my Friday emails, in our team meetings. Let's say, okay, in the 3 weeks when someone was able to do this, that demonstrated the value of transparency, or that demonstrated the value of partnership, or, whatever your values are. I think at this time right now, not only should you not reimagine, but you should actually almost go back to basics, and don't forget that values are part of your basics, and really kind of ground people. When people came to your organization in the first place, at some level, they were jiving with the values of your organization. And so how do you put those out front and center again? And for me, part of that too is what I've heard positive feedback is, because when you do that, it also shows that you're caring about your people. And again, I'm saying people broadly, stakeholders, people living with, volunteers, not just as part of what they're doing to help end diabetes, but as people, right? Because we're all seeing a different side. We're on Zoom conversations, we're this, we're that. And so the values help to humanize it again too, right? And so to me, that's been an essential part of it.
Well, one of the things I've observed is that in a world, in a situation that is very unpredictable, successful leaders are the ones that give some predictability to their teams and some measure of confidence and predictability to their boards. Reflecting on your board, so your board hires you. They had probably been, what I typically see is organizations that have had some CEO transition. The boards are usually closer to the operations, sometimes with all the way up to their elbows. Sometimes it's just their fingertips, but they're usually right into the organization. How did you approach getting the board to move from maybe ground level back closer to that 10,000 meter level that we typically want to see them at?
Yeah. So I think three things I would say. The first is I understood that I had to earn that yes, it comes, they should be operating strategically and not operationally. But there's lots of should haves in the world. And this was a board that had to go through COVID essentially with an interim CEO. So I guess what I'm saying, Doug, is an acknowledgement that there were really hardworking, amazing people on our board, and not to have the assumption that, well, they're operational out of some sort of negative motivation, that they actually, I guess to assume good intention and to sort of say, okay, so as they see me come in and as they see me take the reins and as I get small wins and build confidence, I'm assuming that at least some of them, if not all, will start backing off. And that's indeed what's started to happen. But the second thing has been having some really clear governance conversations. So not so much about the CEO to the board, but there were a number of sort of, as you said, fingers in as well as eyes in that were happening on some of the board committees. And so what I did was I got out the terms of reference of the committee and had kind of the honest / half naive, but not really, conversation with the committee chairs of, well, so it's interesting that on this agenda, this is on there, but when I'm looking at the terms, so, help me understand, because where I've come from, that wouldn't be an item that would normally show up. So again, a little bit playing dumb and a little bit naive, but using Diabetes Canada's own governance documents to kind of help reframe it. So it wasn't I'm reframing it. It's what you guys said is not what's happening. And then the last thing I would say is I'm really transparent, blessed with a really amazing chair. And she and I very quickly got to where we had very transparent conversations. So I was able in our status, I meet with her weekly and, in our status to start saying, not, week 1 or 2, but hey, I'm noticing this and I just want to push a little bit because again, in my experience, that's not how I would normally see it. And I want to see, is this something that you see ongoingly you guys would be involved in? Or you're trying to move back out? And for the most part, then I would get, no, good catch. We're trying to move back out. Kind of got used to this to the point where this Friday when we had it, there was a couple board members that are now sort of policing each other, so to speak, where, questions will come and they'll be like, I think that feels a bit operational for our, and I'm like, woohoo, because we don't have to say it. They're kind of doing it. But I think it all started with understanding that there may be a reason that happened. And so, don't presuppose, I didn't want to presuppose that that's how they wanted to be operating. And indeed, that's what started to happen over the, past couple of weeks is as I'm having chats with board members, they're starting to say, oh, thank God. Because honestly, we were putting so many hours in. And again, remember COVID during happened all this too, but we were down in the weeds and like in certain people's cases, and honestly, it was exhausting and I didn't want to be there. And please tell me to get out. So when you hit that point, it's good.
Well, and it's one of the things, advice I often give to clients and CEOs that I'm talking with is don't just focus on what the board is doing, focus on the direction that the board is moving. And that knowing that the board is stepping back, and in some cases, with some boards for good reasons, some for not great reasons, it takes a long time to get back to that 10,000 meters. And each step is about establishing credibility. Others are far more willing to get back up there for reasons of history and circumstance and the individuals around the table. But as a CEO, you've got to know know your audience and know what direction they're moving. You know where you want to get them. And often it's just patience.
And when I was at Heart and Stroke, we used to kind of have this running joke about the board was about a third. A third of them loved operating at the strategic level, and you could always count on them to help pull the others up. A third could go either way. And depending on how the conversation went, they could get dragged right down that rabbit hole, or they could get pulled right up. And then a third, and you could often tell them, and you can tell I'm old because they used to come with paper copies of their, not their iPads, and they had highlighted every line. They had notes in the margin or whatever. And those folks, you had to identify early on. Again, great that they're thorough, great that they've done prep, but you kind of knew your audience, as you said, and you thought, okay, and you prepared as a senior leadership team, okay, if these folks start going there, how are we going to try to deflect up? And sometimes even how can we speak with the other third and then the top third, really, in a sense, to help manage that. And my experience, Doug, has been actually the third, a third, a third is a pretty darn good rule.
Yeah, I would say you've got it.
And if you ever think you're going to have a board that doesn't have that third very thorough, would be one way to put it. And I might say operational and tactical, you're kind of fooling yourself.
I think if I could, my magic wand or my mission in the board work that we do here at the Discovery Group, if we could eliminate the following phrase, you know what we should do?
Yes.
Around the board table, the social profit sector in Canada would have an immediate 15 to 20% increase in efficiency and effectiveness, because that level of, it is 99% of the time, it is well-intentioned. But the setting strategy or setting tactic with a veil of strategy is really damaging to the momentum and sustainability of organizations. And I think well-governed organizations are the ones that are going to be strongest coming through this pandemic. And the ones that have that operational board leadership, where maybe it's more than a third that want to be elbow deep in the organization, are really going to struggle to be nimble enough to adapt to the changes that are coming.
But I think it's also going to be hard for CEOs. I don't find myself in this position, thankfully. But for smaller, I said I cut from 160 to 95. But for those organizations that started at 50 and are down to 20, at some point, you actually may need the arms and legs of board members, right? Like you may need them to play multiple roles, and because just you don't have a lot of people left, right? And so how do you navigate? And I think you can do it, but it's more challenging. How do you navigate when you say, my experience when I've had that, it's, oh, so help me understand what hat you're wearing now. Right? Like you're reframing it for them like, oh, okay, so, I'm here talking to you as a board member. I'm not here talking to you as someone who had to go drive the food share van to whatever, and the person might be playing both roles, but helping the person understand. So when I was at Heart and Stroke, we had the chair of the board for a while who had to be the interim CEO. And when we got a CEO on, I found with her a lot of times I had to reframe that. I had to keep saying to her, okay, so is this with your former interim CEO hat on? Or is this with the board? And I only had to do that a couple of times until she kind of got the clue. But I think people are going to have to do that because you may have to use people. Like we're all in tough times, right? Like you may have to use board members to do things that you just didn't think you'd ever have to do. And that's fine as long as they're clear in their role.
It is going to be fascinating to see how all of this shakes out as we move through this pandemic. The one thing I'm pretty sure of is that Diabetes Canada is in good hands with you and the CEO chair. And I want to thank you very much for making the time to be a part of this discussion here today.
Well, thank you. I've really enjoyed it. My pleasure.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Discovery Pod. Be sure to tune in next week for another inspiring and informative conversation. Don't forget to visit our website, thediscoverygroup.ca, for more resources. If you like what you just listened to, please subscribe and tell a friend about it. Until next time, keep working to make your organization exceptional.